people do you like working with you or for you? Can you describe the qualities you're looking for with people? Dedicated. Honest. Considerate. Passionate. Respectful.
Caring.
I didn't hear anybody say anything. Caring. No, I didn't hear anybody say anything about meeting their bottom line. These are all emotional descriptors. We want people who care, who are willing to invest wholeheartedly in whatever we are up to. It all comes down to connection. You're going to be hearing a whole lot about that tonight. It's a factor that isn't actually considered very much when we start addressing the whole notion of leadership. Because research has clearly shown that human beings are happier, healthier, and live longer when we have strong relationships. And given the amount of time that we spend at work, in fact, most of us spend more time with people we work with than people we live with. Even our spouse. This becomes really...
Except you and me.
Except you and I. I don't think there's two people on planet Earth that spend more time together than her and I. I'm surprised we haven't somehow become surgically attached at the hip. And for a guy that defined himself on being independent and orbiting around things his whole life, it's an amazing accomplishment on my part.
Did that sound flattering? I'm not sure. That sounded
I think
flattering
so.
Right there.
It was a comment about me.
Okay.
And if we want people who care about their work, leaders must have the courage to care and invest wholeheartedly in those people we're working with and working for. So we have to invest in that.
So we're going to start by defining what we mean by real leadership or vulnerable leadership. And it comes down to maximizing people's performance by investing in them emotionally. Essentially having the courage to care. And I use that word courage really specifically because caring actually requires courage. And expressing care is vulnerable. Imagine for a moment that you say on a daily basis to people what you would say about them if you were attending their celebration of life. And I don't mean to be morbid about that, but it is shocking to me how we wait to say the beautiful things until the person can't hear them. Right? Somebody's retirement party, somebody's celebration of life, and then all this beautiful love comes pouring out. What if we start saying that now? And if you think about saying that now, it feels scary, doesn't it? It feels scary and vulnerable to express ourselves in that way, and yet it's really, really essential. Humans are hardwired to connect with each other, and we do it through emotion. Our brains, our bodies, our minds are inseparable from the emotions that animate them. And what motivates us or inhibits us in terms of our performance, whether it's on the job or anywhere else, all has its roots in our emotional experience. Our relationships with each other, at work, at home, are at the core of what that emotional experience is. So we're going to start by doing a really quick review of the role of emotion as psychology has understood it up to this point. We make better decisions when thought is informed by feeling. So we make better decisions when thought is informed by feeling. This is counterintuitive because people tend to think when you're making a decision, we need to do it logically, right? We need to sort out the facts. We need to make all our decisions based on facts. The reality is people make really bad decisions if they do it only logically. And we know this because we've studied people who have brain damage, particularly in areas that have to do with emotional experience. These people, when making decisions only based on fact, make ridiculous decisions, especially in terms of risk, because it requires an emotional experience to understand to be able to do a good risk assessment, right? We need to be able to have emotional input into that. Emotions also color our perception and carry over from one situation to the next. So, simple example, you have a fight with your partner in the morning, you go to work, and you're cranky with everybody at work too. Even though you know that the situation that caused your crankiness in the first place is separate from the thing that you're now experiencing. Because you already feel irritable, you are experiencing reasons to be irritable in your world. And the same is true, you fall in love. Isn't the world a beautiful place in the first couple weeks when you have just fallen in love with somebody? Everything is smiles and sunshines and rainbows and roses.
When you're smiling, the whole world smiles with you.
Like that. So the emotional state that we're in looks to prove itself. And this also holds true of what's referred to as unconscious feeling, meaning things that we're not even aware are happening inside of our bodies. They also bias our perception about what's happening out there in the present. Now, here's an interesting little twist to that. Research has also shown that people with strong emotional intelligence or emotional awareness have a certain amount of protection from that coloring that happens. If we understand where the feelings are coming from, we are better able to separate ourselves from that and attribute the feeling to where it belongs and make better decisions because we're seeing more accurately.
What does this say?
Warning, it's a trick.
Yes, but if you've already seen this, don't play smart aleck. Right? It says ABC. So the middle figure is B, correct? Yeah,
See?
or are you sure? Right? Is it that? Or that? And it hasn't changed. And yet, what is perception? If you come from planet alphabet, you will see the letter B. If you come from planet numbers, you're going to see the number 13. We see what we are looking for. That's a simple little optical illusion to present the principle of how context of what we bring into it determines what we see in front of us. But if you think about that in terms of perception and relationships, it's more what we project onto them, and it comes from our feelings. If we're in a state of anger, following what Catherine said, anger and fear, guess what we're going to be looking for? If anger was alphabet, and it runs into that figure in the middle, it's going to turn it into whatever it is to be consistent with the intrapsychic makeup of you as an emotional human being. In the same way, if you came from a state of feeling safe, friendly, or caring, guess what you're going to be looking for? You will find what you're looking for. It's a really important principle to begin to understand.
And here is a typical table of what you'd see in a research journal that has to do with this kind of emotional / decision-making interaction and how we perceive things. It's a little scary, isn't it?
There's going to be a test at the end of the evening, so make sure you study it completely.
This is what it looks like. I am going to translate for you what this essentially says. So, being in a state of anger or fear on the negative side over there, we tend to latch on to negative events and perceive things from a negative perspective. And when you're in a state of anger, you will tend to see events as caused by and under the control of other people. They are the cause of the situation. When you are in a state of fear, you will see events similarly in a negative way, but you tend to more see the events as being unpredictable and situationally determined. So you don't have any control in a way. Of particular significance for our purposes tonight are these two, pride and surprise. I highlighted pride because it's especially important. When we're feeling a state of pride, we are more apt to see positive experiences, and we will interpret them, favorable events, as being due to our own effort in some way. We see ourselves as having agency or control over it. It feels good, and we feel like we have done something for it. Whereas surprise has the opposite effect. We don't necessarily see ourselves as being involved with the positive result in any way. So I'm pointing this out because this is going to be important later. Emotions also influence the depth of thought that we experience. Fear and anxiety and anger are emotional states that trigger an outer focus and a really quick response. We don't think, we act. When we feel safe, we're able to move completely into our internal experience and have more depth of thought, to think more deeply about what's happening and more completely about what's happening. Now, interestingly, managers think that people are motivated by money, right? I'm going to reward your performance by saying to you, if you do really well, you're going to get this much money out of the deal. Studies have shown that trying to increase people's effort through financial incentive, for example, paying somebody to do well in an exam, doesn't work, because it increases anxiety. That doesn't work. Final bit, which we're going to focus on entirely pretty much tonight. Emotions are social and relational. We're hardwired for connection. And connection is the key to being able to tap into that powerful, powerful emotional experience that drives human beings every moment of every day.
This represents a typical hierarchical organizational structure. Who's the leader? The person on the top. We like to think of communication in this leadership structure as it flows through our organizations, like this picture, with these nice clean lines from the top down. We think of connection as something we do that is optional. We pick up the phone, we deliver a message, we organize a meeting or discuss something, we have a conversation on our breaks about our vacation plans. And we think that the connection with another human being is optional, that when we decide to have a conversation, that's when we're communicating, and when we stop that conversation, that communication has ceased. That's not true. But in those interactions, the content of what we are saying with our words makes up only about 20% of what is actually taking place. This is so critical, because there's another 80% of communication that is essentially nonverbal. It's more about our body language or our eye contact or lack of eye contact. And this is, the 80% is a relationship message we're giving to each other. This is so critically important to understand, that when we are engaging with another, the relationship message always overrides the content message. If somebody asked you about a conversation you had a week earlier with someone, the first thing you're going to remember is what it felt like to be with that person. What was being communicated between you two, rather than what you actually talked about. And that relationship message will sometimes be completely contradictory to the content message. The content message could mean two different things. For example, if Catherine and I have a disagreement, which doesn't happen that often, but when we do, it usually ends with me apologizing.
That's so
right?
weird.
And I close with I'm sorry, but I can go, all right, I'm sorry, okay?
Which is likely to have a really good result, isn't it?
Or I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Okay? Content message was exactly the same, but the relationship message was completely antithetical to each other. And so it's really, really important to understand that is what is active all of the time. So when we say, we think it's optional, but whether we're connecting with somebody, even if you not speak to someone for weeks on end that's a close friend of yours, you're communicating something very powerfully by not communicating. It's alive. Now, we want to show this. This is really quite amazing. I'm glad we're finally showing one of these clips, because I don't know if you watch drug commercials, right, on television, when they warn about all the dire consequences that could happen. And you wonder, why are they doing that? Well, they have to do that. But they figured out a way of doing it so that the 80% relationship message overrides the 20% content message that you could die from taking this pill.
Herb quit smoking with Chantix and support. Talk to your doctor about Chantix and a support plan that's right for you. Some people have had changes in behavior, hostility, agitation, depressed mood, and suicidal thoughts or actions while taking or after stopping Chantix. If you notice agitation, hostility, depression, or changes in behavior, thinking, or mood that are not typical for you, or if you develop suicidal thoughts or actions, stop taking Chantix and call your doctor right away. Talk to your doctor about any history of depression or other mental health problems, which can get worse while taking Chantix. Some people can have allergic or serious skin reactions to Chantix, some of which can be life-threatening. If you notice swelling of face, mouth, throat, or a rash, stop taking Chantix and see your doctor right away. Tell your doctor which medicines you're taking, as they may work differently when you quit smoking. Chantix dosing may be different if you have kidney problems. The most common side effect is nausea. Patients also reported trouble sleeping and vivid, unusual, or strange dreams. Until you know how Chantix may affect you, use caution when driving or operating machinery. Chantix should not be taken with other quit smoking products.
You know, it makes me want to start smoking again just to take Chantix, because I could have that nice peaceful afternoon sitting outside on a bench with my dog reading a book while my loving wife cuts flowers. And there's beautiful music in the background. Do you understand that that's how they're utilizing, taking full advantage of this concept we're talking about? Right? People will buy Chantix. They won't have heard one word.
But isn't it shocking to actually make yourself listen to that stuff? There you go. That's the example.
So we are most powerful when the content message and the relationship messages match. When others can feel our message, not just hear the words. How can, if you're a leader or a parent, how can anyone be excited to work with you or work for someone who's not passionate in terms of having congruency about their messaging? And this is true at both ends of the spectrum, good or bad. And that may be why people that are leaders of profound fear are successful, because they're actually congruent on their content and their relationship message. They're exactly the same. And I'm not going to mention any names tonight.
And it may also be why the counter message doesn't have the same impact, because the argument against a very fear-based way of thinking is often logical, right? Facts. it doesn't have the same impact. So back to this question, who is the leader? On a relationship or emotional level, everybody has equal influence. When you have a difficult conversation with your boss leaves that conversation equally impacted. At that level, there isn't a hierarchy. We all have influence and power. We're all influencing and we're all being influenced by all of the time. And the whole system organizes itself around what each person puts into it. And this is a really important thing to be aware of, that it doesn't matter about the hierarchy. The system is going to organize itself around who are the leaders, and they might not be the designated ones. So despite the fact that most people in a position of management believe that money is what motivates people, it isn't true. Study after study has shown that our primary motivators are emotion-based. And this is now, I'm bringing you back to that pride. What motivates people is recognition, being seen and acknowledged for contributing in some form or fashion, having somebody notice your hard work and what you are doing. That is what motivates you.
And that recognition has to be congruent. You can't just strategically say, well, now I'm going to start recognizing my stuff. When your relationship message still might be distant or judgmental or occupied with fear and all kinds of things, when she talks about recognizing others, she means completely recognizing others.
And so from both, recognition is the experience of being seen. It is the experience of somebody noticing and seeing who you are and what you have contributed. And from both ends of this spectrum, people work with a lot more passion and efficiency when they feel like they're an important part of a greater whole, and who they are and what they bring then has value and impact.
I'm sorry, I know you told me not to do it. It'll just be 30 seconds. I'll just detract for 30 seconds. I just want to say, this is such an important concept. In
he
the
wants
workplace,
to say it
everywhere.
passionately.
I'm getting excited.
Passionately.
I mean it. Like, if we actually knew who we were talking to, if we knew who that person actually is that you work with, you would never do the things you do to them, behind their backs, in your mind. If we really knew each other, we wouldn't do anything to each other but love each other. And the reason we do what we do to each other is we don't know each other, and the people become problems instead of people. And therefore we don't feel remorse. We don't really figure out what the downside of it is, because we don't actually know who we're dealing with. So what we're talking about here is learning about how to know people that we are actually dealing with. That was 45 seconds.
I think it was at least a minute.
Was it?
Right there. And so this, in terms of drilling down into the emotional experience that drives us as leaders and as individuals, we need to understand what Simon Sinek refers to as our why. Our inner motivation starts with understanding why it is that we are doing what we do. And companies often only focus on those two outer circles, right? The outer circle is what your company offers. What are the products and services? That red circle, the middle one, is how do you provide those services in particular? And at the core of it is why. What is the purpose? What is your purpose? What is important about it for you? What inspires you about what you do? If you lose touch with that, you are going to lose touch with your excitement period. And all of those qualities that you named about how the people that you want to work with on your team, this is where they spring from. What is the purpose? What is your why? So we'll give you a little peek. You're getting an inside glimpse right now into what all of the people on our team get at Clearmind. This is our why. When they first come into our organization, This lays out exactly who we are and why. And it looks pretty. And the bottom line is real connection. Real connection. Really understanding people, really valuing people, fostering the experience of safety that comes from having that sense of real, valuable, and strong relationships.
We spent the last couple of days writing this lecture, and it actually impacted us quite a bit, just around reflecting on our own staff. And I want to apologize to the staff when we came in. I completely tackled
totally
every one of you and hugged you like you've never been hugged before. And I'm sorry if I caused any bodily injury, but I really love you. I really just wanted all of you to know how much I just love you, and I love what we're doing together.
And it has very personal reasons for both Duane and I. For those of you who've attended our lectures, we're not going into lengthy personal stories tonight, but that belonging and not belonging was a core theme of my early life, as it also was for Duane. And so this feeling of belonging is arising out of a very real personal experience and a real desire to have a different experience for the people who work with us and for us, and ultimately our clients and the world at large. Now, here is the rub around all of that. When you are passionate about your why, when you can hold that and feel it and hang on to it, it makes you vulnerable. Because the minute something or someone is important, you feel scared and vulnerable. And this is true the more personal your cause or sense of purpose is.
And so as personal investment increases, whether it is a job or a volunteer activity or a relationship, then as she said, so does vulnerability, because when something is important, we are going to naturally feel vulnerable. When something is important, we get scared of losing it. And therefore get more sensitive to criticism. We become more controlling, more reactive, and more strategic. And as we said, when we are anxious, we then see more things we're anxious about. A spouse, the more important they become, the more vulnerable you're going to feel, and you're going to naturally feel more anxious. And when you're more anxious, you're only going to see more of what you're anxious about rather than what actually is. And so as vulnerability increases, then follow me on this, so then does the relational, organizational problems start arising. Because we do not know how to handle our vulnerability. And vulnerability is up. The more important the job becomes, the more important your partner becomes. You're not just dating anymore. You have a house, you have 2 kids. They have power. Your fears come up. Oh my God, this person has so much power. I could lose it. I could lose so much. Then you stop being in a relationship with that person, but more with your past. And that's when an organization gets into trouble. It happens on a relational level. It is so rare to hear people in a company or even in relationships talk about where the real problem is in terms of what they're bringing in, what they're looking for, and what they're seeing, where it comes from. More they talk about the issues from a positional stance. And it happens when people stop relating openly and start positioning themselves to protect themselves. And away it goes. The more you protect yourself, the more you're going to give the other person evidence that you are the problem now and the enemy too. You're no longer a person. And you wonder why it gets so complex and so crazy. Because we don't know each other anymore. It happens literally when people refuse to actually be vulnerable and revert to those reactive stances. In this context, most organizational problems are, in fact, relational problems. This says much more about leaves of absence, morale, low productivity, resignations, stealing, illness. It says more about that than anything else, that we're not in when we're not in relationship with important others. It is a formula for physical and mental illness. So in other words, the more passionate, the more important or passionate you feel about what you are doing, which you are doing, the more the why is driving you underneath. You know why you're here, but you're going to feel vulnerable about that, and you don't know how to be vulnerable, and then the more relational problems are going to potentially then happen. We have such a long way to go to learn how to be able to talk vulnerably. Crazy world right now. And Clearmind is a great example of this on both ends of the spectrum. People often talk about our organization that it's like a family, and it is. The more you care, the more you have to navigate through the vulnerability that arises out of that level of caring on both ends. Everything comes up.
So we're going to move backward now to where this all begins, because where it begins also is the solution to how we get through it. We start at the beginning. When I say we're wired for connection, that happens right from the outset. It is quite literally the foundation on which we begin our lives. Our emotional network, which operates through our cortex and limbic system, gets established in the first 6 months or so of life. For those of you who have kids, you understand this crazy feeling, right? This little child comes into existence, and you had no idea that you could love a creature as much as you love this being. And that is what's happening on the other end of that equation as well. That emotional network is what facilitates bonding with our caregivers, and it's really powerful. Our thinking brain doesn't even begin really until about age 5. The first time you have a sequential memory where you're telling yourself a story in an order, that's when that logical thing is just beginning to come online. And so we are wired, and we operate primarily through our emotions. It might even be more accurate to say that we are wired to think through our emotions in certain ways. We get the patterns of thinking that we establish are established based on our emotional experience. And we operate really strongly on emotion. It's obvious in little children, and it continues in adulthood as well, despite the fact that we may not be as aware of that process. How it works is, again, the word recognition. It works explicitly through the process of recognition. We have these little mirror neurons in our brains. If I were to flash a picture quicker than you could even register it, of somebody laughing, the muscles in your face would respond. Or if I were to flash a picture of somebody crying, the muscles in your face would respond. We literally are wired to reflect emotion back and forth between us in this way. And that reflection is what creates connection. We feel seen. We mirror ourselves back to each other in this way. And when our inner experience is accurately reflected back to us, it feels good. And here is the weird thing about that. It feels good even if the emotional experience is not good. So when you feel sad, when you feel pain, and somebody sits with you and looks at you, and the expression on their face, you know, the empathy expression looks a little pained, right? Like when we're reflecting empathy back, it is a pained look. And that experience of having somebody feel you in that state feels good, even when it's feeling bad.
You have no idea how even the sounds you make while you're being empathetic have tremendous impact. Just to go, what that actually is transmitting and communicating to that person, that I see you, I understand you, I hear you.
And last month, I talked about still face. This month, we're going to show still face. So this is an experiment that was done by Ed Tronick, is the foundation of attachment theory, one of the early experiments on attachment theory. And this is mirror neurons at work. So we're going to watch.
In the still face experiment, what the mother did was she sits down and she's playing with her baby, who's about a year of age.
I'm like a girl. Oh.
And she gives a greeting to the baby gives a greeting back to her.
Yeah.
This baby starts pointing at different places in the world, and the mother's trying to engage her and play with her. They're working to coordinate their emotions and their intentions, what they want to do in the world. And that's really what the baby is used to. And then we ask the mother to not respond to the baby. The baby very quickly picks up on this. And then she uses all of her abilities to try and get the mother back. She smiles at the mother. She points because she's used to the mother looking where she points. The baby puts both hands up in front of her and says, "What's happening here?" She makes that screechy sound at the mother, like, come on, why aren't we doing this? Even in this 2 minutes, when they don't get the normal reaction, they react with negative emotions, they turn away, they feel the stress of it, they actually may lose control of their posture because of the stress that they're experiencing.
Okay. I'm here. And what are you doing? Oh, yes. Oh, what a big girl.
It's a little like the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good is that normal stuff that goes on, that we all do with our kids. The bad is when something bad happens, but the infant can overcome it. After all, when you stop the still face, the mother and the baby start to play again. The ugly is when you don't give the child any chance to get back to the good. There's no reparation, and they're stuck.
So
in
that
really
is a
ugly
really
situation.
powerful example of how this works between humans. Mom wasn't being scary, right? Mom wasn't angry. She wasn't yelling. She was just not responding. And that has an extremely powerful impact. And the reality is that adults respond the same way to still face.
Yeah,
We do.
When we think our contact is optional, that we'll decide to communicate, we think that if we just sign off and do something else, that we're not having to deal with our connection. We are, and we are abandoning it. And it has powerful, powerful relationship message ramifications all day long. I hope you're beginning to realize that there's no neutral moments.
May I ask an impossible question?
Oh, by all means.
We have an impossible question. Do we want an impossible question? Does that mean I have to give you an impossible answer? Yeah, shoot.
You have a group that you're very disappointed in, it's not dedicated and motivated, and you're upset.
Yes.
And you want to kill them.
And hiding under that wanting to kill them is some vulnerability. Hint.
You know, I actually had one of my students come up to me today and smile in my face to try to get me to smile. And so I didn't feel like smiling, so I told him I was very sad. I thought that was honest, but you know, I mean, if I'm trying to motivate them and love them, and I don't feel like smiling and giving them that, whatever it is that they're looking for, I mean, do you have a suggestion?
Yeah, I mean, if something has happened that is
Can you repeat that
hard.
question? Because
So the question is, when something has happened with your team and you are actually very unhappy about it, how do you then motivate them and get them back? Right?
And motivate them but be authentic.
And in a real way, in an authentic way. The trick is, in terms of this mirror neuron thing, you can't lie. It's not going to work for you to put on a smiley face. And on a relationship level, if we don't communicate in some form or fashion that we value the person, people stop hearing. So every communication has to start by saying, you are all really important to me. A relationship level, if we don't communicate in some form or fashion that we value the person, people stop hearing. So every communication has to start by saying, you are all really important to me. We have an issue here and I really want to work it out because I care about you, right? And that anger is often a defense against vulnerability. And I'm hesitating on giving you the whole package, but I mean, you have to start by communicating that you actually value the person, which gives them a reason to listen. You have to give your underlying vulnerability, including your own accountability in terms of whatever you contributed to the issue and the situation, and help them to feel safe enough to come forward. People don't come forward with accountability until they feel safe.
They're not going to come forward with accountability until you do. Why should they? Mm-hmm. And short of all that, if that is all impossible, and there you are in the situation, and you're unable, if you can at least recognize you are not seeing what is real. You are seeing what you brought into it, what you're looking for, and it's got its own history. And if you could admit to yourself, I don't know who this person is. That chart she showed earlier about anger, we're always certain we know exactly what it is. There's no curiosity. But if you could actually stop long enough to tell yourself, actually, I don't know this person. Therefore, I'm not going to make any decisions right now. I'm not going to trust any decision I make that is not fully embracing who this other individual is. I mean, just think if we all did that we only made decisions when we really knew who the other was and who we are. We're both three-dimensional human beings on a relationship level. Because when we do, when we know the other person, like I said, you will care. Because we're all human beings trying to figure out this crazy life experience, and we cover it up with all kinds of armor and defense and strategy. But if that's all you're seeing of what they did wrong, you're not seeing who they actually are, and you're not being who you actually are.
And if you can create safety in relationship, then I guarantee that if somebody's screwed up, they're feeling bad about it. They are. And they will want to come forward with that as well.
Was that an impossible question? I don't think so.
Excellent.
That's because it was a good question.
And so
how did you like that relationship message? Is that all right? All right? It's a good question, good answer. We feel good about each other.
So we showed you this picture, this example as an infant. The reality is this process continues with us as adults all the time, all the time. Emotions are regulated in relationship. When you sit down and you talk to your friend about what is happening and you think you're sorting out the content of your problem in some form or fashion, or when you try to talk to your partner and you say, I just need you to listen, don't fix it. What's actually happening that's helping is somebody is seeing you and hearing you and feeling you. And you can see yourself being seen, and you can hear yourself being heard, and you can feel yourself being felt. And that calms us down even when there's no solution to the problem. And that calmness opens us up to possibility that we don't see when we're in the middle of a highly reactive state. We perform at our best when we feel safe. And safety comes from being seen in this way. And being seen on both ends of the spectrum requires being vulnerable. The reality is, when people are feeling safe and engaged with each other, when this mirror neuron thing is happening, we look like an adult version of that mom and her kid. There's a lot of eye contact. There's a lot of facial expression and animation. There's a lot of, variation in our tone of voice. We do the adult version of that dance with the mom and the infant. And when we are upset and disconnected and we do the still face, we get every bit as anxious as adults. And it actually feels even safer to see somebody who's angry than it does to see somebody who's just cut off and still, because we know what we're dealing with. When you can't read somebody, it's scary. And that still face is also an artifact in adults of early trauma. Let me finish that thought. Because we learn to have the still face as a response to it being dangerous to be read, when it's dangerous to be noticed. And so we kind of shut everything down and make ourselves invisible so we're not.
Mm-hmm. And I ran into this personally myself recently. I started Clearmind in 1990, and Naz was very kind to say, well, together they've been working for 50 years. I think it's actually more than that, because
it's more. Maybe
I've been 45 of those already. And Clearmind's been quite a journey for me. Creating this whole thing right at the very beginning. And I'm coming of the age where, the company's grown substantially, and we have many, there was a time when it was only me. Catherine came here in 1996, so I started in 1991, all by myself. I did everything. And I've come to a place where where our people are saying, you have to have succession planning now. Succession planning, what is that?
It means when he is no more.
When he is no more, you have no idea how many times I've been hit by a bus in conversations. What happens when Duane gets hit by a bus? I actually did a graphic of me getting hit by one just to make them happy. But it's it's been an interesting process. I didn't imagine. I'm not going anywhere, folks, so don't worry, or don't get too excited. There's still a number of years left in me, but and I just get a little more choosier about where I'm spending my energy. I'm not doing everything anymore. We have 20, 30 people working for us. But it's been a weird process. Like, I drove by, I spoke about this in a lecture a few months ago. I'm just going to be very brief with it tonight. But we've been living in the house we live in for about 10 years. We purchased it in North Vancouver. And prior to that, we were, when we had no money and we had to rent, we got this old house and this cul-de-sac in between the freeway and the off-ramp. But it was our home, and that's where Erin, our daughter, really spent most of her years. And I drove by there a few months ago, and it's gone. The house is gone. And so were 3 or 4 of the other houses around it. They're clearing them all to develop something. But it's just an empty, and I'm just standing there. It's like, shouldn't there be a monument or, a little film to watch or a guide to tell stories about all the things that happened here? It was like it didn't exist anymore. And it kind of made me feel the same way, because there was a guy sleeping in a tent up there who looked at me like, "What are you doing here?" "Hey, I own this. I lived here." But he didn't know me, didn't know the stories, didn't know what happened. It was like it never happened. And I thought to myself, as succession planning, am I just going to be forgotten? A very hard thing to feel. And I saw the temptation to cover it up with the defensive mind that does not want to feel vulnerable, that will feel threatened by stepping back. in fear of being forgotten, I'll start looking for evidence that I am. Right? Or start hanging on to the things I do and not let anybody else touch them. Start getting combative and judgmental. I could see that happening. Like, who wants to do graphics now? I'm the Photoshop guy here. I could feel that kind of energy of trying to fight for what I fear I might lose. And in my family story, my father, never reached a state of vulnerability. He committed suicide in 1986, and I could understand this kind of collapse into. I started to feel like I was going to distance, and I didn't do that. We're in a staff meeting, and I decided to share this with the staff, that I actually felt like I was frightened that I could be forgotten. And it was a stunning moment for all of us, where they were able to see me, and I actually was able to let them see me and be with me, and I could see me being with them, being with me. Like it was, and they ended up, where are we, Kath? Yeah. We ended up, and this is even vulnerable for me to show this next slide, because I thought, well, I'll just show a picture of me with a smiley face with my staff and hugging each other, but this is what they actually did. Can you do that to your boss? And I mean, I wish we could see everybody's face there, because it's like everybody was in this, what we call the cradle. And it was one of the most touching, the most stirring moments I've had in my entire life. To be able to be with my staff, letting them be with me in what I was going through, and them really letting me know that I will never be forgotten. It was stunning.
And that requires the courage not only to let yourself communicate that vulnerability, but to start by letting yourself feel it. We all have equal influence. There isn't actually an hierarchy in terms of our emotional impact on each other. And I'm not saying that to erase the obvious power dynamics that exist in organizations and cultures, but on this level, we all have power. And we've really been trying to impress on you tonight that connection isn't an option. Humanity is connected, and what we each put into that mix affects the whole.
Because I will tell you, even in that situation, which is what most people would do, you default to some kind of safety or non-communication, it will create problems.
Still face doesn't
work. It will
work.
create problems. To the degree that we're not being entirely vulnerable and real, because that is what we need and that's what we want. It's innate in every one of us. It's our natural state. And without it, we are going to be somewhat sick. It's that simple. So that vulnerability is so critical. We can't understand. We can't overstate it. That's what our workshops ultimately are about, is actually having the experience with a group of other people where it's like taking the red pill in the Matrix. What world is this? I thought it was the blue pill. What is this world where people actually care? And I care. And it just ignites a part of you that's been there your whole life, that's just been waiting for an opportunity to have that kind of an experience. So you can take it into your family, you can take it into your work, you can take it into your community, and be one person that is going to start waiting for that moment, where you're not going to trust making any decisions that are anger or reactive based, because you don't know who you're talking to. I firmly believe that when I say we would not do the things we do if we knew who we were doing it to. We wouldn't. We couldn't.
So we invite you to take on a little homework as you're leaving, and that is to say now to the people around you what you would say about them when they are no longer here. Think about that. And again, I'm not meaning to be weird or depressing or strange, but let people know. Have the courage to care.
Because
You're
you do.
going to feel better for doing it, and the world is going to be a better place as well for doing that.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Duane and Kath.